I just want to read a couple more just little excerpts from this because again, this is stuff that not a single one of these right-wing figures would agree with a single syllable of. We have deluded ourselves into believing the myth that capitalism grew and prospered out of the Protestant ethic of hard work and sacrifices. Capitalism was built on the exploitation of black slaves and continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both black and white, both here and abroad. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Again, it's fairly clear. White Americans must recognize that justice for black people cannot be achieved without radical changes to the structure, Ron DeSantis, of our society. And like he goes on and on. Like specifically, I want to jump to graphic 11 because this is from Where Do We Go From Here in 1967. The first sentence of this seems to bear on what's going on with the arguments against CRT. Whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. That is exactly what every bit of this fight against education has been about over the past couple of years. It is elderly and middle-aged white people who do not want to have one uncomfortable thought for 3 contiguous seconds. And they definitely don't want their kids to learn things that they went out of their way to not know. They don't want their kids coming to them asking difficult questions or maybe thinking poorly about the actions of past generations. And that was nearly 60 years ago he wrote that. And we're still seeing it acted out, not just in rhetoric and not just in the personal preferences of individuals, but the governor of a state making it the law of a state that this sort of ignorance should be brought down onto another generation. Any final thoughts, Danielle?
I have said so many times that, and I'm a former educator, that our public school system is the biggest proponent of white supremacy because it spreads lies. You spend your entire adulthood on learning what was taught in K through 12. Who we've decided is important, whose voices should be lifted up, right? Is done as a way to allow for white people to have no accountability for any of the wrongs that have been done in this country. The last quote that you read is everything. It summarizes everything that is happening now, and that was written, so many decades ago, and we're still here. Why? Because of the refusal and the belief that white people in this country have nothing to learn, right? Which is why we're still here fighting for education.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, I don't want, like sometimes in choosing to spotlight things that a certain group is doing, I don't want to give across the idea that they're the only people that are doing it. I hope that including cinema is an indication of that. Basically, definitely in action and in inaction, virtually every Democratic politician is guilty of the vast majority of these things. They want a big defense budget. They don't mind that we're spending so much more on that than on these other things. And by the way, there is no get out of accountability or need to grow like free card. That simply doesn't exist. Calling yourself a liberal, I like to think at this point we're pretty clear that that isn't going to absolve you of this. By the way, referring to yourself as a progressive or a leftist, I've looked around and there's some racism there too. So let's be very clear about that. Everybody has a need to continue to grow and to make sure that their values are in the right place and that the things that they're advocating for, the policies they're advocating for, are grounded in an understanding of the current state of things as well as history. I do want to just give one tiny shred of credit to Ben Shapiro for what he had to say. I don't often give him credit, but I think he is awful and being at least a little bit more honest about what the right does on this day. So he tweeted, "Every MLK Day, we are treated to a bevy of think pieces on how the only way to achieve MLK's dream is to embrace group redistributism and racial discrimination. MLK may have made such arguments in 1968, but that simply isn't the dream or the pathway we celebrate him for." And that is honest. I mean, the whole thing's dishonest. But he is saying, no, I get that that's what he's advocating for. That's not what we celebrate him for. We've made up a thing and we celebrate him for that. All of the rest of them are pretending that the king they celebrate is an accurate reflection of what he called for. But Ben Shapiro is, he's a dishonest little weasel. But in this case, he's willing to admit, no, we've made up a fake king and we're gonna celebrate that. I don't care about racial equality. I'm not interested in income inequality or wealth equality. I don't give a damn what happens to you. I just like having this made up historic figure that we're gonna pretend to like for a day and then go right back to racial demagoguery the next day. And so credit to Ben Shapiro for that.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.